Hey guys, it is Friday, October 7th, 9:19 a.m. where I'm starting this recording. Our Lady, Feast Day of Our Lady of the Most Holy Rosary, which we are going to get into and tie into Don Dolindo, who is shepherding us from heaven. This is super exciting. I got emotional thinking about it this morning. This is going to be an awesome episode, if you will, on the commentary of Don Dolindo in the Apocalypse, tying it into the Battle of Lepanto, tying it all into current events. And you are going to see just how important his writings are for our current situation right now. And so people ask me if I'm doing these live, and the answer is no for a couple reasons. One, sometimes with the live streams, the internet gets kinds of funky and quirky, and I don't want any of Don Dolindo's words messed up by some bad internet connection. And two, I'm easily distracted. So I want to really focus on getting Don's words out, Father Don's words out, without me inputting a whole lot in the comments. I will start going off on tangents, so I have to just record these and put them out. Again, I'm recording this on the Feast Day of the Most Holy Rosary, and I probably will do a live stream later in the day, maybe in the evening or so, because I have his book, which happens to be showing up at my house today, supposedly, that I ordered, I think it was like Sunday or Monday. And apparently Amazon doesn't do 2 day shipping anymore. See, I go off on tangents. But anyway, his Meditations on the Holy Rosary, that book is coming to me today, and I'll probably do a live stream regarding that, but not this one. Hopefully, I don't run out of memory. This might take me a couple times to record anyway. So, here's what I want to talk about. This is profound. So we are going to pick up where we left off in his commentary, and I believe we are still in chapter 1. I don't know because I'm translating from Italian, so I'm trying my best. I don't know if it's chapter 1, his commentary in chapter 1 of the Apocalypse, or just his commentary, just chapter 1 of his commentary. I'm pretty sure it aligns though, so I'm pretty sure we're still in chapter 1 of the book of the Apocalypse. And so we left off with him talking about the vision of Jesus and the stars being the bishops and the lampstands being the churches, and Jesus being in the midst of his church at all times. And so we're going to get into that. But first, I want to cover the Battle of Lepanto, because you're going to see, I'm trying to think if I should do this I'm going to do it first. We're going to use the Battle of Lepanto as a template, if you will, of what should be done during wartime. And then we're going to go back and look at Father Don's commentary, because his commentary was written during World War II. And this is very, very important. This is why his writings have to get out. And then we're going to look at the World War III that we are on the eve of right now. So first, let's look at the Battle of Lepanto, in which it was under the reign, if you will, of Pope Pius V, and the Christian forces that he had gathered together and united were greatly, greatly, greatly outnumbered by the Muslim invaders, the Turks. The navy, this was a naval battle, so the navy of the Turks and the Muslims was superior to that of this ragtag group of Christians. And so Pope Pius knew they were in trouble because the Turks wanted to take over all of Europe. So he united all of Europe, really. He asked that the churches remain open 24 hours a day, and he specifically asked that everybody pray the rosary. And so in a miraculous turn of events, the Christians won. Heaven said no, the Muslims weren't going to get Christendom, they weren't going to get Europe, and there was some miraculous things that happened, and Pope Pius V attributed this to the Blessed Virgin Mary through the Rosary, through her intercession that was asked for through the Rosary. And so it became the Feast Day of Our Lady of Victory, but also the Feast Day of Our Lady of the Rosary. In the whole month of October, for this reason, is dedicated to the Most Holy Rosary. Now, the special thing about the Rosary is that it's simple, and so everybody can pray it. And it's a powerful but simple way to reflect on the gospel and to spread the gospel and to, more importantly, unite around the gospel, just as Christian Europe did at that time. And then when we unite together, at the same time also uniting with heaven. So it works in, it's like a rope that, binds together and then binds to heaven. And so it's this whole way of union, uniformity, coming together around the faith, and then of course all the supernatural benefits of that come with the rosary. So, and it's also, as far as St. Louis de Montfort points out, it's one of the ways to offer up reparations for sins, to make up for sins. It's a form of penance. So it's not only that's why it's so powerful, because it's not only a prayer of petition asking the Blessed Mary for her intercession. It's also a prayer of meditation, and it's also a prayer of penance. It has a long history of being a prayer of penance. That's why when you go into, confession and do something really bad or whatever, the priest will be like, okay, you need to pray a whole rosary. I don't know if that's ever happened to anyone. Not saying it's happened to me, but just saying. So anyway, so we have this awesome theme of the people in Europe, of Christendom, and united under the Holy Father, united with the rosary, recognizing that they needed help, turning to God, not turning to man, turning to supernatural solutions, turning to spiritual solutions, pleading with the Blessed Mother to intercede for Europe so that they would not succumb to Islam, to the Muslim Turks, so that they would not be overrun. They didn't try to figure this thing out on their own. They didn't hold summits and send out tweets and all this stuff. What they did was they united and got down on their knees. There's claims that on the ships, there was a priest on the ships, hearing confessions and then offering absolution to people who fought in the battle and who would have died and things like this. And so it was powerful. It was a powerful example of how Christians should behave with facing a brutal enemy. Okay? And now we're going to turn to Father Don with this in mind, with also in mind the fact that Father Don is writing his commentary during World War II and has a lot to say about the behavior of Christians during wartime. And that is why I was getting emotional this morning, because the magnitude of this thing is not like, I knew I was being asked to do this. I knew I was being prodded to look into this by heaven, probably because I have a very, very, very great devotion to St. Padre Pio. I mean, really like over the top devotion to St. Padre Pio. And so they were friends, and Padre Pio would point people to Don Dolindo. And I believe that has what has happened to me. I believe he has pointed me now to Father Don so that I could try to get his wisdom writings, blessings out, because this poor priest from Naples, this very poor priest from Naples is shepherding us from heaven. Make no mistake about it. Okay, so we're on chapter 1 continued. And he says, Jesus is speaking for the benefit of his church because we live in a world poisoned by disbelieving naturalism. And I'm going to give my input about, actually, I want to give the historical context right now as far as what was going on in southern Italy at this time. This is my note. Let's just start with that. During this time, southern Italy especially was under severe scrutiny during the 1800s. And late 1800s, even when Father Don lived. This was written in 1944, I think, but in his lifetime he saw what I'm about to talk about. Southern Italy, especially because it was rural. He was in Naples, which was a cosmopolitan area, but the people, outside of that were very rural. Under severe scrutiny for the many miracles and miracle workers that were popping up at this time in southern Italy. The church was really cracking down to rein it in, as to not have the institution of the church undermined. We can see how God chose this region of the world during this time period as a hot spot for many saints and miracles. For example, Padre Pio, Father Don Dolindo, Luisa Picaretta was a southern Italian woman. Um, so anyway, so God chose this region of the world during this time period as a hotspot for many saints and miracles in a world that was becoming rationalized, especially through public education. Keep in mind, southern Italy did not even have an organized public school system until after World War II. So right around the time that Father Don saw this, because he died in 1970. All of the teaching came through the church up to that point. So all the education was through the church. And then with the liberalization of Italy, which started with the unification of Italy, that changed. It became, Americanized in a way. It was the public school system and all this. I suspect it was one of the last regions in Europe to adopt a formal public education system. Also, to note, the unification of Italy brought about liberalism in that country. So just keep that in mind as we continue on. So he's addressing a lot of these issues. So he says Jesus, because he's referring to the fact that Jesus is giving the revelation to St. John. So Jesus is speaking for the benefit of his church because we live in a world poisoned by disbelieving naturalism, a world miserably influenced from the false revelations, the false prophets that come from the Protestant world, and in a world in which people listen to myths. And that might be a weird translation. That's how it was translated, but it makes sense. But use that term loosely. So, a world in which people listen to myths and no longer to the voice of God. Instead, man listens to himself, and he brings up Hitler and Mussolini and all of these figures who act as political messiahs. What misery, what pain, what suffering in the face of such a situation. When we open up the book of Revelation, we must be extremely attentive to the voice of Jesus Christ who speaks to his church, but instead we are more attentive to the voices of the unbelieving world, of these false prophets or supposed superheroes. No, we must be attentive to the words of Christ who holds the 7 stars here and that has humanity in his hands. Padre Manelli, who's giving this conference, I didn't put a lot of his input in, but I wanted to note this. He states that it has gotten much worse in Italy since Don Dolindo wrote this, and we now even have more modernism born from Protestantism and even nature worship in the church. This, he says, will be difficult to explain to future generations. Naturalism is ancient and now has come to replace the faith in God. It is a shocking step backwards as we return to unbelief or the blindness of the pagans who had been moved by revelation in ancient generations, i.e., converted. Father Don continues with the rebuke of rationalism. Public revelation logically ends with a revelation that concerns the last times. It is the apocalypse that talks about the history of humanity until the end of the world. That's how the public revelation is written. But Jesus Christ does not cease to speak in his church with the admirable providence of his magisterium and does not cease to speak with the luminous manifestations of holiness through the saints. Public revelation ends with the last book, but the revelations to the church do not end there. The magisterium will not contradict the deposit of faith. The Lord wants these manifestations to be controlled by the authority of the church, but does not at all give us the right to take the attitude of supermen to the point of scoffing. Criticism as pathological manifestations of scientism have poisoned the poor human mind. Instead of science giving the certainty of God, it criticizes God and gives certainty to man. He speaks of what we describe as, this is me inputting, basically he's speaking of what we describe as weaponized science, poisoning the human mind instead of it being used for good, which is to help man reach its end, which is God. The systematic doubt about everything is often a distressing doubt for what every revelation of the love of Jesus, I'm sorry. The systematic doubt about everything is often a distressing doubt for which every revelation of the love of Jesus, either for the church or for the saints or for the very manifestations of divine justice in life and in the world, becomes vain or is reduced to playing briefly with fantasies and ideals. This hyper rational criticism can lead to hiding the voice of God who spoke to us in a very human way. This can lead to refusing the voice of the church and to refuse the saints and to be unable to recognize the manifestations of divine justice. Everything becomes unbelievable and sterile, and man's souls and minds become disabled. Now, he makes a historical reference here to the war as being a chastisement from God meant to convert. And so, bringing it back to my explanation of the Battle of Lepanto, what did that period of crisis, that war, do? It brought people to deeper conversion. It got people down on their knees. It made the churches be open 24/7. What have we done? What did we do when there was a pandemic? Did we open the churches 24/7? Did that bring people to conversion? No. We closed the church doors and said, good luck, you're on your own. That is not Catholic. That has never been the Catholic way. And why he's bringing up this as a historical reference, the war, is because the apocalypse, he knew this was going to repeat itself. He was a smart man. He was a divinely inspired man. And so he saw what was happening, and he's applying it to the apocalypse because the apocalypse really deals with war and triumph in a lot of ways. Yes, it obviously deals with other chastisements. He's specifically talking about war because that's the situation he found himself in, but war is also a chastisement. And so this is where this comes in as far as the commentary is concerned. He says this about the time he was in. Despite the fact that there was such a devastating situation, Hitler occupying Italy, men did not convert in the face of the horror of war and continued to live in sin because of the above mentioned problem. That's me in parentheses. Instead of climbing, this is Father Don's quote, instead of climbing one step for the love of God and observance of the commandments, the people descended even more into the abyss of impurity. Of the something ultra chilio, which I didn't translate yet. Sorry, I meant to do that. But basically of sin, of impurity, vices, of violence. And were so warned that they did not deserve the attention or the cessation of the immense scourge. He's saying basically people did not convert, and therefore they didn't even deserve the cessation or the end of the war, the end of the scourge. We write this chapter on October 28th, 1944, while the war is burning in full, while Italy is devastated by the Germans in the theater of the Anglo-American War. And I found that to be a very much an Italian reference, Anglo-American. And it gives a little insight how the rest of the world looks at us as Americans, because I don't think we as Americans really understand our connection with the Anglo-Saxons, with England, and that whole mess. And so we tend to think like, oh well, we separated ourselves from that, but we come from that. At least not me, but the founding of the country comes from that, and so we need to address those issues as well. So anyway, we are without bread in a frightening famine. So there's a famine going on. We are without bread in a frightening famine between alarms, bombings, ruins, and the people painfully continue in their lives of thievery, impurities, religious indifference, or rather hostility against the Lord, who with atrocious blasphemy is called responsible for our misfortunes, of which we alone are the cause. We hope that for this 1944, before this 1944 scourge ends, sorry, the translation was difficult. We hope that this 1944 scourge ends, but how many runes and how much blood? Even so, God uses much mercy and forgives us. Padre Manelli interjects here. Yes, because we are so dull. This priest is phenomenal, y'all. If you can look him up and deal with the translation issue of using closed captions, he's solid. So anyway, Padre Manelli. Yes, because we are so dull that we cannot even recognize the divine mercy like what we are experiencing in this moment. And he did this during COVID. So he says, from the pandemic to the explosion of homosexuality, all corresponding to the cult of Mother Earth worship. So he's putting all of this stuff that's happened since the Pachamama incident, the pandemic, the explosion of this really, it's like an army of transgenderism, pedophilia, homosexuality, all this stuff. He's relating that back to exactly what Father Don Dolindo said, the cult of Mother Earth worship, paganism. God speaks is the next commentary that I labeled it from Father Don. God speaks to us through the graces of the gifts. I think he's referring to the gifts of the Holy Spirit and his mercies. The graces penetrate us, the gifts shake us, the mercies rarely change. Jesus Christ speaks directly to a soul, and it is not without a profound reason that the apocalypse was added to the church by means of an angel and by means of Saint John, whose very name means graced by God. There is a synthesis of the journey of the revelation of Jesus Christ. The revelation happens because God grants us the grace to speak to us who do not deserve it. And we lose track of that. I lose track of that. We don't deserve any of this. None of it. But yet, we deserve to be wiped off the face of the planet, the race totally obliviated right after the fall. But God didn't do that. In his mercy, he still tries. He still speaks to us. He gave us public revelation. And we lose track of that. He relates the angel is the Pope, eminent messenger of God. Angels are the bishops, angels the priests. Jesus Christ, through these angels, and again, angels means messenger, reaches souls still today, giving them thank you gifts and special mercies. Blessed is he who listens to the voice of God through the graces he gives us, through the gifts he bestows in his church, and through those special mercies that from time to time come to shake the earth. Such are, for example, the great revelations of the love of Jesus, or the revelations that come from the Immaculate Heart of Mary, such as the Marian apparitions, and such graces of mercy are also even the scourges that affect the world and the church. And we lose track of that. We lose sight that scourges and chastisements are also graces of mercy. It must be confessed that it is shameful the way in which souls have received and receive divine revelations. Humanity has written the darkest pages precisely in these circumstances in which it is now in. We are extremely poor in gifts of graces of mercy because we presume that we want to see and touch everything, even knowing that we have an extremely sick eye and a hand stiffened by continuous contact with matter. The souls who seem most righteous and spiritual and may be saints draw very little fruit from the loving visits of Jesus Christ because they remain in their environment of natural reason, of systemic criticism, of frowning. Scientism invested with perennial judgment of everything and everyone. No one can replace the blessedness proclaimed by God. Blessed is he who believes, a blessedness of his own. That might be a mistranslation. Souls are quirky when they pretend to believe only when they see with their eyes. The sick are the hypocrites, the rationalists. Those who put science above God are miserable. They consider themselves to be infallible but are dragged to the depths of foolishness. Instead of being hypocritical, we go before God. So grace and peace may come to us from the one who is, who was, and who is about to come again. Here we talk here we walk in the present life as exiles in search of the homeland, as brothers who love each other through charity, as companions in the tribulations of life, in the search for the kingdom of God, and in patience that Jesus Christ taught us with his example. To achieve it, we do not form thrones or pedestals of grandeur, as if we are above others. No, we achieve it in tribulation, in the kingdom, and in the patience of Jesus. We must humbly recognize ourselves. We are all in Patmos, where St. John was exiled. We are all in Patmos in mortal life, exiled, all waiting for the loud voice of God, who calls us, if we live, to form the triumphant Jerusalem in the sky, waiting for the kingdom in sighing and expectation of eternal love. And that is the end of this little segment, 25 minutes. Powerful words. Go back and re listen. Powerful words by St. John. Sorry, by Father Don in regards to St. John's book of the Apocalypse. And again, oh, now I'm sorry. This is, I told you, I get distracted. So, relating it to, we saw how in Lepanto, how we were supposed to behave, how we're supposed to behave. War is supposed to cause conversion. Now we see a very holy priest in Naples, writing during World War II with the Nazi invasion, the Nazis occupying Germany, the Pope being held as prisoner in the Vatican, all stuff, right? And we see Father Don, this holy priest, lamenting because it's not converting people. People aren't recognizing this as a chastisement. People aren't recognizing this as an act of mercy, a way of God speaking to them to say, hey, change your ways. They're not recognizing it as a course correction, and they're doubling down in their sins, even to the point of blaspheming God and blaming him. When it was humans who created the problem. It was rationalism and scientism and turning away from God, which allowed the war to come about. And so he's lamenting over this, and he's very distraught over it. Obviously, from his writings, we can see that. And so I can imagine right now how much he's lamenting over this from his spot in heaven. I don't think there's any sadness in heaven, but you can see why he wants this message out right now, because again, Europe is faced with annihilation. I'll just be honest with you, it's bad. And again, like in World War II, only on a even worse level, instead of viewing the pandemic, viewing the looming world war, viewing the economic crisis as acts of mercy, as signs from God saying, hey, I love you so much that I'm trying to shake you awake. I'm throwing the water on your face to try to wake you up so that you turn to me, because it is only in turning to me and turning to my mercy and asking for forgiveness and getting down on your knees and asking for the Blessed Virgin to intercede that there will be peace, that there will be solutions. But that's not what's happening. We're once again, we have hardened our hearts. We can't see it even more than in World War II. We think the problems are man-made. I mean, they are, but we think the solutions are man-made, but we think the problems are things like climate change. But really, as Father Manelli points out, it's this pagan worship. It's the cult of Mother Earth worship that's the root of these problems. It's rationalism that's the root of the problems. It's scientism that's the problem. And so God is trying to shake us awake, but instead we are doubling down. And we're acting like he doesn't even exist. I think it would be almost better if we blamed him, but we're not even doing that. We're acting like he totally doesn't even exist. We've even slipped further from the time of World War II. And so these things are going to continue to happen, and people's hearts will continue to get harder. And we have, on a large universal scale, slipped further into the abyss of sin. We've doubled down on things like abortion, transgenderism, things like abortion being the solution. You know what I'm talking about, for the problem, when that's not the solution for the problem. The solution for the problem is penance. The solution for the problem is sackcloth and ashes, just as the seer from Our Lady of Akita was told right before the pandemic broke out. There was a reason that message came through like it did and when it did, because the solution was not going to be this. That was heaven warning us, but we didn't listen. And we're still not listening. We have to wake up and we have to listen. Joan of Arc Media out.